We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
What's the latest in Israel? What is the US position? And what is happening with the IDF and the Hamas battling in the streets of Gaza? Now, we're very fortunate to have with us today our national security correspondent over at libertynation.com, who happens to be a retired Air Force pilot. He's also a former Principal Deputy Undersecretary of Defense Controller. Dave, thanks for being with us.
Happy to be with you, Mark, always.
So, Dave, the news is changing pretty much day by day, but what's the latest situation at time of recording in Gaza?
Well, I think that what's happening, and I think the Institute for the Study of War is an excellent source to find out how things are moving in terms of a timeline. But it appears as though Hamas fighters are attempting to slow the pace of the fighting against Israel Defense Force soldiers. And basically that does two things. It provides them time to rally support among, their terrorist allies like Iran, and to generate opposition to Israel internationally. And what they're doing is they're trading space for time. And the second thing is that it, as you might suspect, it wears down the Israelis according to their thinking. But so far, the IDF continues to advance, albeit slowly, but I think that's more a feature of their attempt to keep the civilian casualties low, and also to be very deliberate about how they deal with Hamas and their network of tunnels and so forth. I think it's interesting that in November 4th, the IDF captured Hamas battle plans, and what the battle plans are pretty much what I just said, this delaying action, and it allowed their leadership and fighters to flee the Al-Shifa hospital, and also provided the Israelis the opportunity to show clear evidence that the Hamas terrorists do in fact use hospitals and patients and civilians as a shield for their fighting.
Well, that actually came to light this week as well, didn't it? With National Security Council spokesman John Kirby, who said that the U.S. has gathered intelligence that demonstrates that Israel's claim that Hamas uses hospitals and tunnels underneath them to conceal and support military operations and hold hostages. And so it's the fact that the US has independently verified this, I think that does a lot against the propaganda war that Hamas is fighting, doesn't it?
Yes, it really does. But the problem, of course, is that the U.S. national security team is no better than the Israelis in getting out the message and basically countering the disinformation that comes from Hamas and others who want to see Israel defeated. So, to your point, yes, it does, and they need to push that narrative much more strongly. But I think too that there are other things afoot. You also have these Biden administration warnings that they don't want to see the Gaza fighting seep into the region any more than it is. Meanwhile, Iran-backed Houthi rebels in Yemen have threatened to attack Israeli shipping in the Red Sea, and they're firing missiles and drones at Israel. So I think that that train has left the station. The fighting has in fact crept into the region, and additionally, you have the Iranian-backed fighters who are shelling and attacking U.S. Outposts and bases, and
I know your thoughts on this. I think you wrote a piece. There's been over 100 attacks on U.S. assets
That's right. I call it in the category of "you've got to be kidding me." The Pentagon Deputy Press Secretary Sabrina Singh on the 14th of November explained that the paltry airstrikes as an attempt of deterrence are in fact working, and then goes on to explain about the 56 attacks on U.S. outposts from Syria and Iraq and the MQ-9 being shot down by the Houthi terrorists. So I don't know what her definition of deterrence working is, but by golly, she stuck with it.
You did a really fascinating piece recently about the US response seems to be find an empty warehouse, bomb it, and say, look what we did. I think that pretty much encapsulates the response there. Let's talk a little bit about, you mentioned at the beginning of the segment here about Hamas and, of course, other terrorist groups operating in the region, because there are many, about how they're trying to slow the spread or the effective capture area of the IDF. And part of that is by embedding themselves with civilian populations. Now, I think and another article you wrote, really, Dave Patterson has been writing piece after piece for the pages of libertynation.com. I believe it's the most comprehensive collection of analysis available out there. If you haven't read it, please go to libertynation.com and check it out.
Thank you, Mark.
You talked about a lot of people are calling these war crimes when civilians get killed whilst the IDF are hunting down Hamas terrorists. And your explanation of it was just fascinating, because it's something that I kind of took for granted, that I knew what a war crime was constituted of, or what constituted a war crime. And I guess I didn't know. Could you give us a brief description of what the accusation is and what the reality is there?
Well, the accusation is that because the Israelis are fighting a war, and that includes the killing or wounding of civilians, that they are therefore guilty of war crimes. And that's simply not the case at all. And it's not the case based on the Geneva Convention either. And the Geneva Convention proscribes a belligerent from intentionally using civilian people or their property as a shield to basically attack the opposition. That is a war crime. And
it's precisely what Hamas does.
And that's exactly what Hamas does, precisely. But it also says that if you are attacking a military objective that will, in fact, further your efforts as a fighter on the battlefield, and you encounter opposition using civilians as shields, that you are obliged to continue your attack. That, and unfortunately, but if they're shooting at you and they represent a threat, then the war continues.
Yeah, Ben Shapiro, the conservative podcast host, captain of the Daily Wire, he was recently at the Oxford Union at a debate in the UK.
Yes.
And yeah, he made a couple of very good points to people who were questioning him on this topic. And he asked the young lady there, he says, well, so you're saying that if a terrorist can hide themselves in a crowd, essentially they're immune. They get away with it. And he was making the point that clearly that's not the reality of war fighting. But these things are just getting more convoluted. What we need is more clarity. Everybody, I think, needs to understand what the reality on the ground is there. And Dave, I think you've done some great reporting on this, and I do recommend everybody goes and reads it under the byline Dave Patterson. Dave, thank you ever so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Mark.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Don't get caught up in the media madness. Join our movement for free thinking and free speech at libertynation.com. Publishing news and analysis 24/7 with original articles by our team of authors who tell it like it is. Join us each week for online TV shows, The Uprising Podcast, and Liberty Nation Radio. We believe in free thinking and free speech. We are libertynation.com.